It's a no-brainer. I'll use the notwithstanding clause in a heartbeat.
Folks, there's a lot of stories on this channel that I've covered that seem so common sense, they honestly should not be newsworthy, but here in Ontario, common sense seems to be under attack. And the reason I say that is because an article came out a few days ago about a judge in Hamilton ruling that the sex offenders registry was unconstitutional. And the reason why is that it violates the offender's right to liberty. Now, my question is, when did we start prioritizing the convenience of the offender and not the safety of the public? So with that being said, let's dive into this story. Now, an article came out in the Hamilton Spectator a few days ago, which is now behind a paywall, unfortunately. But the National Post also covered this, where they wrote, Provincial Sex Offender Registry found unconstitutional by Ontario court. The accused lawyer argued that the law is overbroad and grossly disproportionate, infringing on his client's charter right to liberty. It goes on to say the Ontario's sex offender registry law will need to be overhauled by the legislature after it was ruled unconstitutional by the Ontario Court of Justice in the January 29th ruling. That judge at hand, Justice Davin Garg, agreed with arguments made by the convicted applicant's lawyer that the law was too broad and infringed on his client's charter rights to liberty. The registry was established in 2000, and this is what they call Christopher's Law, because in 1988, there was a young man who was murdered and killed, this 11-year-old. He was abducted, all this kind of stuff happened to him. Through the court system and through the legislature, they implemented Christopher's Law, which makes all convicted sex offenders have to be on this registry. However, apparently this is now unconstitutional according to them. It says the registry was established in 2000 as a centralized database designed to assist the police in the prevention of an investigation of sexual offenses. The legislation behind it created a requirement for sex offenders to provide detailed personal information and report regularly to law enforcement with the aim to keep the registry current. However, last year an Ontario man, Michael Roberts, intentionally failed to report after doing so for 13 years. He had been convicted in 2010 of multiple sexual assaults, sentenced to a term in prison, then released. Subsequently, he was registered on a national and an Ontario sex offender registry. So the judge says that it's unconstitutional for them to look into this guy or have this guy register himself. Yet you and I, whenever we change our address, health cards need to be updated, driver's license need to be updated. But for this guy, it's affecting his human rights by asking him to tell us where he lives or where he's moved to. Like, this is how bananas we are currently. And Doug Ford, not too long ago, he blew up about this when this was about the Supreme Court's ruling talking about the child pornography and how these people who are distributing it should not get a minimum sentence. But he kind of talked about this as well, about the registry, and this was his blow up.
Well, it's absolutely critical. You have a sex offender and he's living next door down the street and you have a bunch of kids. You want to know about it. So we're going to make sure the sex offender registry is out there public. And sure, we're probably going to get shot down from the courts again, but I'll use every single tool to make sure we protect the victims over the sex offenders. It's a no-brainer. I'll use the notwithstanding clause in a heartbeat. If the courts, again, it's like the Supreme Court, a week ago, 2 weeks ago, said that sex offenders that push child pornography out should not get a mandatory 1-year sentence. Like, what is the Supreme Court thinking? Who are you in favor with? A bunch of diddlers that are out there pushing child and hanging out in neighborhoods and trying to track down young children? Or do you protect the victims? And unfortunately, the Supreme Court has chose to protect these nasty criminals, and just, they make me sick. I'd throw these child people, I'd throw them in jail, throw away the key, they can rot in there, because nothing's more important to protect our communities, protect them from people like these. I can't even put the word. They make me sick, and they need to go to jail, and that's it. And I'll do everything I can to make sure communities around Ontario know If there's a sex offender living next door or living by a school, they shouldn't even be out. They should be in jail. Let them rot in there. I can't stand those guys.
Now, I obviously don't agree with Doug Ford majority of the time, but I cannot deny what he's saying there is 100% true. Now, the article goes on to say Roberts challenged mandatory registration of all sex offenders and the lifetime reporting obligation for certain offenders. His lawyer argued that these components of the law were overbroad and grossly disproportionate, infringing in Section 7 of the Charter of Rights, life, liberty, and security of a person. Again, this guy gave up all of those rights and liberties when he decided to commit multiple sex offenses and assaults on children or whoever he did it to. Point blank. He infringed on somebody else's rights and liberties, so why should we respect his? That's the consequence for doing what you did. Now, later on, it goes on to say, he also noted that the majority in the Supreme Court concluded that mandatory registration was overbroad because registering offenders who were not an increased risk of reoffense bore no connection to the purpose of preventing and investigating sex offenses. So basically, they're saying that the exceptions to the rule is going to be how they're going to govern now, because some people might not have to, they stated that after 5 years of being on this registry and you haven't done anything within those 5 years, the likelihood of you doing something has greatly decreased. Sure, that might be true for some people, but you can't paint a broad brush and say, well, these exceptions to the rules is how everyone's going to be affected. The registry is there for a reason. It needs to be applied. Now, technically, this only does apply to this guy, Michael Roberts, today, but that's the problem, is now this leaves a legal blueprint or a loophole or a door open for anybody else who's on this registry, because they can reach out to their lawyer and be like, hey, Michael Roberts got this and they said it was unconstitutional for him to be registered all the time. Why should I be registered all the time? And now there's precedence for that argument because of this ruling. And so if we don't fix this and say Doug Ford doesn't use the notwithstanding clause and it doesn't go through the courts, because this is a provincial court, it's not the Supreme Court ruling, but if this doesn't make its way up to the Supreme Court, well, then we're going to have a huge domino effect, as I mentioned, where anybody who's on this registry can argue, hey, it's unconstitutional, it's against my right to liberty, which is just mind-blowing. And like I said, we need to remember why this law even exists. As I said, Christopher's Law came about because an 11-year-old was murdered by a repeat offender who was let out on the streets because there was no way to track him. So then they created the registry so we had the whereabouts of these people who have committed crimes like this. It is so common sense, I don't know how these judges are saying it's unconstitutional or why we're even playing this game saying that we need to care about their rights of liberty. And again, this is where Doug Ford steps in with this nuclear option about having to use a notwithstanding clause over something that's so common sense. And I feel dumb asking this, but do you guys think that he should be needing to use it? Because if this person is a multiple offender, has been already on the registry for 13 years, is it all of a sudden that 13 years is long enough and we should just give him a pass? Because in my opinion, no, that's not what we should be doing. He should be on the registry for life because of as a consequence for the actions that he committed. But I want to hear from you guys. Let me know what you think about all this. Do you think the system's broken, specifically here in Ontario? If you also live in Ontario, are you tired of these kinds of stories and this nonsense that these judges continue to push, where we're hearing about people who deal with child pornography not getting mandatory sentences, and now this, sex offenders not having to be on registries? Let me know in the comment section below what you guys think about all this. And as always, I will catch you guys on the next one. Thanks so much.